Hey, welcome back to JG3 Reviews. My name is James, and here we explore the world of fountain pens, ink, and paper, and today we're off to India. V'sign Pens has sent me a box of 4 different pens to review and share with you what I like, what I don't like, and what my impressions are of these pens. And so that's what I'm going to do. The first one is this one. It is the V'sign Forte fountain pen. It is a cartridge converter pen. Kind of looks at first a little bit like a Bina Magic, but it's a bigger pen, a more substantial pen than that, and it has some interesting characteristics about it. So I'm going to share with you what I think about this pen. We'll go over its design, its function, put it to paper, and all that good stuff. And in the end, you'll know whether or not this is a pen that you might or might not be interested in. All right, so let's spin that camera and get started. And here is that V'sign up close. We'll start up here at the top as always. You have a little metal finial there and 2 concentric circles, but all one smooth piece. Then a little bit of that resin and then a metal cap. Some of you may notice that this is a very familiar clip because you might have seen it, for example, on a Noodler's Ahab, and that's because Noodler's pens are made generally in India. So you may see some other things that are a bit familiar about the pen. I think it looks a lot like the Bina Magic, which I reviewed quite a long time ago. And of course they are related, but the Magic actually turns out to be a much smaller pocket pen, where this is more of a full-size pen with a really good, healthy diameter there. So you have the grooved metal cap, and this cap is just a snap-on cap with a nice little sound there as it does, and it does have a plastic liner to prevent dry out. You'll notice the metal is a little bit thin, and that cap does post securely, no issue there, and the balance is just fine. You feel the cap back there, but the balance is fine. Continuing down the pen, you have that metal trim ring at the base of the cap, and then this nice dark red resin which tapers down to a very similar trim piece at the base of the barrel. Coming back up to the cap, I did skip that clip, didn't I? I told you what it reminded me of and what it looked like, but how does it function? Well, you can see huge opening and nice light spring to it, but firm enough that it's going to keep your pen in place in a pen loop or shirt pocket or whatever. And with that cap off, you see the grip, and it is one that kind of comes at first fairly straight, just a slight taper, and then tapers very quickly down to a narrower grip. It's not quite the same because of all of the different trim pieces as, say, the Mahjong M800 or the Leonardo Momento Zero, but it's a similar sort of an idea going on here, but you feel that trim ring. Now, that trim ring is very smooth, but it's just because of the amount of drop down that you feel it. It's comfortable to me to write with, but your mileage is going to vary on how much you deal with drop downs, right? One thing I know some of you are going to think is because this is a bit of a larger diameter pen, the number 6 nib really would have suited that nicely. And of course, that's just a thing of preference and aesthetic, but I probably would agree with you. But this seems like a nice nib, and in my dip test a while back, it wrote very well. So I think what you'll find is that functionally, very good nib. Really, the difference between 5s, 6s, 8s, and sizes kind of in between or just off, most of the difference is aesthetic. Sometimes the larger nibs can have a bit more springiness or whatever, but that really depends on how they're made and the materials and a lot of other factors, even more than the size of the nib. What I find that I like about those larger nib sizes is that I kind of like a farther distance from where my hand is to the end of the nib, because that just changes how you write sometimes, and that will again depend on your own personal grip and writing style. But I find that 6 and above, I'm just more comfortable with that length writing. But number 5s don't bother me. I got a lot of number 5s that I really, really like. And again, in the dip test, this one did quite nicely. All right, for the nib. Now, I would agree with those who might say that this should have a larger nib just from an aesthetic point of view. But I will tell you that from writing with the pen in the dip test earlier, this nib is really quite well done. And you can see it's generous tipping material. Definitely at least a medium, and I think it writes really more a medium, almost to a broad. This one is buttery smooth. It does have a plastic feed. You might have been wondering, some Indian pens do have ebonite feeds, but this one is a plastic feed. And again, probably a 5 or 5.5 nib. I'll search that out and have it in the specifications right over here to the side. Opening that pen up, you will see those plastic threads and a converter. Okay, it's a, I call these push me, pull you converters. It's a slide converter, and it does have a little bit of water and ink, even though I only dip tested it. I just pulled that back in. This was perfectly clear until I just did that for you. Anyway, it is an international standard cartridge and converter. You could use another converter if you're not crazy about the slide style converter. Always appreciate when the converter is included. So there you go. You've got a nice cigar-shaped pen. I think the silver of that cap and the dark wine red look really good together. And so as far as color, I like that. And my first impression of the style of the pen is just fine. I like it, actually. I like the plastic that they've used. It, by the way, this one did not stink. I really expected a Noodler style, Bina Magic style need for an air out period. But it only had a very slight vegetal resin smell, and not that stronger smell you sometimes get. For some of you, that could be an important detail, right? All right, there we have that V'sign, and here is the Bina Magic. And as I said, they have a similar aesthetic, although you really put them side by side and you start to see tons of differences. I think online you would look at them and say, now wait, is that the same pen? Nowhere close, nowhere close. But you can see some stylistic similarities, right? Same thing with the Noodler's Ahab here. Much more similarity in the clip, of course, but this is a number 6 size nib, and just different really then from all the way around. But you can still see, again, some similar influences. And then for size sake, we have the ever-present Lamy Safari. So that kind of gives you the size there, right? It's as long almost, not quite as long as the Lamy Safari, bigger around than that pen, probably closer to, say, a Jinhao X450, and certainly closer to that Ahab as well. And then an uncapped mode. This pen is a little bit shorter than the Ahab and the Safari, but a good bit bigger again than that Bina Magic. Now, I mentioned that step-down grip. The way that it goes down, it is similar to the one on the Ahab, but by the time you get all the trim differences sorted out, it feels quite different. And then posted, you can really start to see a big difference, and this one comes in kind of right smack in the middle. All right, and now for the moment of truth of any pen, and that is, how does it write? This is the Forte, and it is a medium nib, a steel nib. And you'll notice there's really a nice amount of material on that nib, the tipping material. And that must contribute to why this is writing just buttery smooth. This is Rhodia paper, by the way, and ink today is Pelican. This is Royal Blue. Check for wetness. I thought it might actually make it all the way to the edge of the paper, and it pretty much did. I thought it might actually go further. Probably not much in the way of line variation, but I'll give it a shot for you. Yeah, no, it's already a broad nib. This is no pressure, and you can see that's a nice broad line, even though it's a medium. I'd say it's a medium to broad. Nice thick medium. So know that going in. And it's writing nice and wet. Let's see if I still know at least a few of the letters of the English alphabet. What do you know? Oh, I think that was me. I don't know. Seems to have good enough flow that it had to be me, right? All right. So, writing really well. For our test words today, I say we just go over today's menu. What about that? I had a cheeseburger. I think this would be a good writing word here. I had squash. One of those weird people who orders a hamburger with vegetables as my side. What do you know? And right now, I'm having chai. There you go. It writes well. Now I'm curious. Let's do the speed test because I don't know if that's me or if that's the pen. I have not had it skip in the dip test, and so let's just see what's going on there, if that's me or the pen. Of course, this is in real time. Yeah, no, it was me because, yeah. It was me because the pen's doing just fine. That wouldn't be the first time, would it? No, I don't think it would. So I've written with this pen, as I said, mainly as a dip test at the office because I hadn't cleaned it out yet, but I was anxious to go ahead and see what the nib wrote like. And in that dip test, which actually was a good bit of writing and several dips in the ink bottle, it did great. And so I'm not surprised that it's writing well, and I'm glad to see that actually the ink is keeping up just fantastically well. I will say this, the grip. So I do find the trim pieces a little bit as I move my hand around, but I do find it a comfortable pen to write with. I mentioned earlier that the cap, that's kind of a thin edge. It's not the smoothest. It's not crazy sharp or anything bad like that. It's about like, say it's slightly less sharp than the cap of a Jinhao 51A. A lot of you have those pens, and some of you then sand kind of the edge of this cap down so that it's a little bit smoother. Maybe a little bit close to that, but not as sharp as a Jinhao. And I don't notice that when I'm writing. That's what I wanted to get to, is it's not bothering me, so it can't be that sharp, right? Fits on there well, posts well, stayed secure while I was writing, and did not bother me because I do often like to write posted, especially if I'm out and around, just to more easily keep track of the cap. Overall, I find the ergonomics of the pen to be quite good. That nib is seriously really well ground and tuned and smooth. So the nib is definitely something that I would highlight in the writing experience of this particular pen. The materials seem good. That plastic is nice and thick, and it actually has a pen of this resin. It has a nice heft to it. Maybe, let me look at this. I don't have my scale handy at the second. It feels like I can imagine minus the ink, right? And it's probably in part because of the metal trim pieces. It feels a little bit heavier, not a lot, just a little bit, just tiny bit noticeable, heavier than this Ahab. So if you're familiar with that pen, that would help you out there in terms of its feel. But it seems very nicely put together. I think it'll come down to whether you do or don't like the design of the pen, and I think it's kind of interesting and something just a little bit different, a little more unusual to just the same old pens that come out sometimes, and I like it. It's been out a while. This is not a new pen. Some of you may have experience with it, but yeah, I like it. Very nice feel to this pen, and it feels nice and solid. And that nib, I'll be coming back to this pen for the nib alone. That wins it for me. That wrote very, very smoothly and terrific on this Rhodia paper. But what do you think? Do you like the pen? Do you have any experience with V'sign in general or with this particular V'sign? And what was your experience? I'd love to know. And as always, I thank you for watching. Always welcome all your comments and your feedback. And God bless you. And I really hope you have a great week.